Hello, everybody. Welcome to this digital session about financing maritime innovation and infrastructure for climate and ocean. I'm very pleased to welcome you today. So we are together for about 1 hour. Very quickly, I wanted to also introduce our panelists on the next slide. So we have great chance actually to have with us today Denis Viennot. Hello, Denis. I call you Denis or Denis as French people, you know?
Hi, everyone. Both are fine. Just Dennis is fine.
Good. So today we're going to speak about financing climate resilience infrastructure and projects. What are the challenges and opportunities? Actually, it's very important because you will see we are working with great partners, and I will introduce just after. And thank you again for joining us today, actually, Denis, because you have such a huge expertise in this field. So we will come back to that just later, just to introduce you rapidly. But we want to have a very interactive session. So indeed, you will see on this slide that it's not all about making a great presentation, but it's especially an interactive discussion that we want to have today. So for all the participants today, you can see on the right part of your screen, you have a question box. So please don't hesitate to ask your questions. The good news is that we have already received a lot of questions that we will be able to address today. And Marine, who is with us, also will collect your questions. So hello, Marine.
Hello, hi everyone.
So I'm sure everybody knows Marine because she's in charge of Blue Economy at Blue Morpho. So she's your key contact. So obviously you know Marine. So don't hesitate to ask your question, as I was mentioning. And if you go to the if you keep progress on the presentation, you will see that indeed today we have a great participant, Denis. So Denis, you are the founder of Altraise. Altraise is a private banking company. You are especially active in climate investments. So this is your key focus right now, but you have also a strong expertise coming from infrastructure financing, working at EBRD, but also GE Capital. So maybe you want to introduce yourself briefly so we can get ready to ask you a lot of questions.
Thanks so much, Geraldine and Marine. So hi, everyone. Great to meet you. So as mentioned, I'm the co-founder here at Altraise. We're a corporate finance boutique, call it investment bank, based in Paris and London, which I co-created about 8 years ago now, with really in our DNA and sole focus to advise companies and projects, both in OECD markets and in emerging markets, and in particular Africa, that have a sustainable development angle, energy transition, climate change, in the broader sense. So we advise companies from startups to project developers on raising capital, whether equity and debt, as well as on M&A, merger and acquisition operations. And just to very briefly, but we've had within Altraise, we've had the chance to again work across the spectrum from companies with innovative technologies, which are of course very relevant to the discussion today, and how to apply them to cities in general, but in particular port cities, all the way to renewable energy infrastructure projects. And obviously over the last couple of years, a lot of discussions with developers or sponsors, and these include cities, of hydrogen or e-fuel projects, which as you know are particularly important for port areas. Just briefly, before Altraise, I indeed spent a number of years at GE Capital, General Electric Capital, looking at diverse types of financings, including waste to energy, clean infrastructure projects, such as wastewater treatment facilities or water treatment facilities, as well as renewable energy projects, and then went on to spend 4 years at the EBRD in their climate change team, which you know, probably most of you know the EBRD, but it is a development finance institution. It works both with governments and authorities and with the private sector, with a specificity versus other DFIs that it is very focused on the private sector, and so it really is a vector of promotion of the private sector and of private sector finance, which I guess is relevant for our discussion today. So very nice. Thanks for the intro.
Thank you, Denis. And actually, indeed, today it's the first of a series of webinars that we are preparing to meet all together on the 6th of June, and we'll come back on that with Marine later on. But the goal of today is really to make an introduction to what is needed, what could be the opportunity for port cities actually to get access to private financing, so we'll come back on that. I wanted also to highlight that Blue Morpho is very happy to collaborate with also 2 major partners. So Blue Morpho, the company I created myself about 10 years ago, where we have especially dedicated to give the best condition to adopt innovation. And among that, obviously, financing is key. So we have already been able to support company to raise 1 billion euros, which is quite good. But, you know, it's not about that. Innovation is also about ecosystems, networks. So we are very happy also to collaborate with EIDP, the leading international association of port cities that gather more than 200 members. It's a great network. We have also a member of this fantastic association with a great team, so very happy to collaborate with them. And also with the Foundation Prince Albert II of Monaco, very dedicated to climate resilience and to support the ocean and to obviously protect the ocean. So all 3 of us are very looking forward to collaborate with you to support the transition of urban port ecosystems. And I want to explain why actually urban port ecosystems are so important to us. Because as you can see, we are focusing on the maritime industry. But when you look at the maritime industry, it's facing a huge challenge, which is its decarbonization. But the decarbonization is obviously a regulation constraint, as we know that by 2050, the shipping industry has to reach net zero. But the thing is that we don't have yet the right solution in terms of energy sources. It's very difficult to get renewable energy competitive compared to fossil fuels. We have done already last year a big action with Marine on financing maritime innovation, and we realized that just 0.1% of ships are using renewable energy for the moment, so a big challenge. And also, you know, the energy density is not there yet. So the question is how the maritime industry can work on its own to reduce its carbon footprint. And our point of view is that actually the maritime industry will not do it alone. It has to come from the ecosystems. And this is where port cities and their ecosystems can be really the orchestrator of this decarbonization and this net zero transition. Why? Because, you know, it's to develop the right infrastructure, the right energy sources. Doesn't have to come only from the maritime industry, but the relationship with the cities and the port city are very important. Also, because when you speak about climate resilience, and Denis, we can come back to about that later on, it's also a question about citizens. The citizens has to be committed. It's not only a few players that will make the real impact, but it's really a society challenge. So this is where the cities are also playing a major role. And this is, I know, a very strong discussion we had also with AIVP and all the members. So when you speak about that, the challenge is here, the port city can support, but the question is how to finance that. What are the financial opportunities to address this challenge of decarbonization? And here we are convinced that when you deal with innovation, it's not only about technology, it's also about new business model, and it's also about financial schemes that can be also very innovative. And the good news is that through the program we are working all together on, with the collaboration with the IVP, Foundation Prince Albert II, and other players joining us, including Altrace today, we are offering you to join us into a journey that will make possible to co-construct, to co-build the right solution addressing your challenges at port cities, the solution that innovative company can provide, and also financial players. So it's going to be a co-construction approach, and this is what we are offering to you now. So welcome to this journey, and this is the first step. So looking forward to that. So actually, Denise, I have a first question for you before our members today just ask their own questions. I highlighted from an innovation point of view the role of port cities. But when you look at cities and port city on your side, as people representing the financial world, do you consider that it's an important sector or field for investors today? Can you give us your advice or feedback on this?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, well, first of all, cities in general are a key player, in the transition to sustainable infrastructure and, resilient systems in general, as well as improved environmental justice, I would say, for citizens. Cities in the broader sense, they represent most of the world's population, most of the world's GDP, most of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, and of course, the majority of the cities are coastal cities, and within these, port cities are critical in terms of, the percentage again of GDP, of GHG, etc. Population living in port cities, probably around 50% of the world's population. But also port cities are critical because of their nature of their activity at the center and at the crossroads of the global transport system, the global trade system, which is becoming even more important these days with U.S. Volatility right now on trade. But more seriously now, these cities not only can have a major impact on transport, maritime transport, but also local transport, hydrogen transport corridors, for example, that are being rolled out in Europe, import of e-fuels, hydrogen, as well as, of course, as any city, everything that can be done locally to cut greenhouse gas emissions, reduce pollution, and develop green infrastructure, whether local transport or electricity supply, etc. So, and buildings, of course, not to.
So according to you, interesting market for investors. But before we deep dive a bit, actually, you know what? I love to see also who we have in the audience today. So let's see also, you have a poll for our participants. And I like to know, who is with us. Do we have representative from cities, from ports? Do we have innovation provider, financial players, or others? Please fill in. So it's very important to us. So because we can also adapt a bit the way we are introducing, the topic of today, to make sure that we really fit with your expectations. So we give you a bit more time because you haven't yet. Not everybody has answered yet. So give you 10 more seconds. So we can deep dive a bit more on this. But it's quite interesting also because just looking at the poll, we can see that it's all about ecosystems. And as you mentioned just before, actually, Denise, it's a question also about innovation. And so just to answer, we have port cities with us today, but we have also a lot of innovative companies. I think we want also to see how they could also collaborate with port city and what could be also the opportunity of financing. So we can come back on that later on. Perfect. So let's go back to the question. We changed the slide. I think we need to go to, yes, thank you, Marine. Yes, so actually, Denise, you highlighted that the cities are very interesting, but what are the financial tools that can be available for cities to get access to financing right now?
So there's a wide range of tools, both on the financing side, which we'll focus on today, but also on the funding side, which is slightly different, and we'll come back on this. But what is interesting, I think, and highlighted here is that while there is a huge need for a huge financing need from port cities and cities in general, there's also a huge gap in finance, and in particular, well, for two categories. One, I would say across the globe for the transition to green infrastructure and resilient infrastructure. There's a lot of there are many publications around that huge financing gap in trillions, right, over the next decades. And two, probably for cities which are less wealthy and have less funding than very large cities, which have more capacity and a deeper economy to rely on. So I think within these two categories, there's in particular a huge funding need, and the private sector, but also the public sector, when it innovates, has a huge role to play. And a couple of KPIs that we share on this slide, which are that many cities are constrained for different reasons. Either they lack public funding, or national governments hinder them and stop them from borrowing, for example, or because they are not wealthy, i.e. have sub-investment grade credit ratings. So that leaves a real need for a very proactive approach from cities to expand the pot of financing and funding that they can access, and as well as interest for innovative sources of financing.
Which is good news, because what we are especially focusing on is this, developing innovative approaches that will fit also with the interests of port cities, but also financial players. So taking that into account, if you have some advices to give to port city, and I think that a lot of them are looking for that, what will be your key advices today?
Sorry, with the advice or the options? Yeah,
options or advice, yes. Well, how would you do that, right?
Okay, so maybe coming back on the previous slide, I think it's important to, sorry, Marine, to understand that, obviously, and I'm sure people around this table know, there are different sources of financing. The traditional ones, loans from governments, grants, tax, of course, etc. That's more a funding source, but you have public sector options which are usually well known, but not always, and some of them are in the innovation categories, but certainly should have access to different types of public funding, including the public funding from international institutions, in particular for cities in let's say less wealthy areas, but not only. There are international institutions focusing on each and every country, whether it's developed or less developed. And then, of course, you have the private sector, which we're going to focus on today. And in between private sector and public sector funding options, you have what we call blended finance, right? Which allows to mix the two and has many benefits, which we can come back on. And then across these different types of financing sources, you have innovative approaches. So, for example, innovative approaches with DFIs can include green funds, like the Global Environment Facility, the Green Climate Fund, I'm sure you all know of, but there are many. They can include carbon mechanisms, which, as you know, have been very volatile and not extremely successful up to now. Nevertheless, there are examples of successful carbon finance mechanisms, in particular on the voluntary markets, and well, at least up to now. In the private sector, you also have a lot of innovative finance in the sense that many private sector investors are investing in green bonds, for example, and I'm sure we'll come back on this. So sorry, I just wanted to highlight this wide range of
Actually, I'm just accelerating a bit because I know time is flying and we have a lot of questions coming, so that's why.
And so yeah, so very briefly on the next slide, which you had shown.
To indeed address how we can address this, the need from the port city. Also taking into account that when you speak about port city, it's local, so I guess everything is a bit specific. So how a port city can attract private investors, this is exactly the key question of today. So I think we can spend a bit of time on this one, also considering that soon we're going to have to take questions.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, each initiative, each project has to have its own business model. So clearly, everyone knows there's, you can go out to private investors with a PPP, with including concessions and other forms of PPPs. You can raise, finance for projects, and then you can rent infrastructure to private players, etc. There are many different configurations. What is critical is that in every case, cities prepare and think about, if the question is how to attract private investment, is to first of all create the right market. So that means private investors are not going to look at projects under a certain size or in general. They are going to want to have a very clear framework, very clear conditions that cities need to address, need to think about before reaching out to private investors for a specific project or PPP. And also cities must be prepared in the sense that internal expertise and knowledge and staffing of the cities is pretty key. These are all complex projects, as you know. But the first step is that create the right environment, create a viable market. For example, if you as a city wish to finance shore power supply, and potentially in your country there are other cities that have the same objectives, it might make sense to pool these projects together, create a larger framework project for larger amounts, and then reach out to private players and private investors. So create that scale. I think the second is, of course, the obvious one. Private investors will only be interested if they have sufficient return on investment and if they perceive the risk as limited. On these two aspects, you have many things to say, many ways to ensure this, but of course, when projects are naturally commercially viable, then it's all a question of, well, how to set the conditions, how to make sure that the concession, for example, agreement is long enough for the project to repay its debt and equity, for example. When the project is not commercially viable from the outset, and often it's the case for resilience enhancing projects or community enhancing projects, and green infrastructure sometimes can cost more than your traditional one, then you need to think about, well, how to boost the returns on these projects and how to limit the risk on these projects. And that means using your new tax, using grants, using blended finance, providing guarantees that can be national government guarantees or DFI guarantees, or even private sector guarantees. But that's the kind of thing you want to think about. So the short answer is you as cities will have to think about how to create the right environment well in advance of reaching out to the private sector.
So you mentioned also risk limitation. Do you have some, example on that? I see also avoid unproven model of technology. So that's also very important because it's also questions, because of course a lot of innovation and technology are here to improve productivity, to showcase impact on the investment. Yes. So how to deal with this actually?
Sure. So limiting the risk, again, that can take many forms. It can be the city having a clear and transparent management of the project revenues and expenses. It can be reporting. It can be putting in the right guarantees. Again, national guarantees or partial guarantees or development finance institution or donor funded guarantees to de-risk the project. It can be the way you draft the contract, which will, for example, for an operator, let's say that brings in new projects, green projects with unproven, for example, models, energy efficiency, for example, in buildings, to provide the right security to the private investor, which can be a partial guarantee from the city or the state, which can be legal aspects or floor payments to the private operator. So there are many examples. And then on your question on tech, what I meant here is, yeah, certainly tech across the financing and funding of cities is critical. There is a lot of tech that you can use to improve management of finance or management of projects to make them more efficient. But what I was referring to here is more, you shouldn't be asking a private investor to fund projects using an unproven technology and model and putting it on them to take the risks. Typically, before you can ask the private sector to fund at scale or in general a new technology or new model, you would want to finance or get financing for at scale demonstration projects, etc. So, or to really offer guarantees to the private players, private investors, saying, well, we're asking you to, I don't know, roll out hydrogen. If for any reason it doesn't work, we'll backstop your losses. We'll ensure a minimum, whatever 10% return on investment.
And actually, Denise, is very interesting also because we see more and more port city looking for collaboration with innovative companies, making incubations of innovative companies, demonstrating the value of their technology. So I think that on that as well, port city are very interesting ecosystems, because if you have started the collaboration and you know the results, then it's really reduced your risks also in terms of innovation adoption. So that's why, again, port city are so interesting. Quickly, actually, Denise, if I have to consider one thing, you mentioned the challenge of return of investment. So when we spoke together, you had a clear sentence that I like, which is the difference between financing and funding. So maybe you can also explain that to our participants today.
Yes, very, very briefly, it's just a clarification. So financing is how you obtain the money to build the asset. Funding is how you pay the financing back, in a way, how you pay the capex back, and that's where there are many options offered to cities, which can be very innovative at different levels, and which I've listed here. But the fundamental principle being that even if you can ask private investors to finance and even operate, for example, in a PPP, for example, a project that intrinsically is not commercially viable because you want to maintain prices low, for example, low-income housing or environmental projects, depollution, etc. But you, as cities, have options to boost the returns that you offer to private players who will come in, finance, operate through different sources of funding. And these sources can be, for example, the typical ones are, national government subsidies, but then you can also innovate as to how you create new taxes, how you create land banks or land pooling, where cities capture the natural value that's taken by land once it's rezoned and redeveloped. You can create funds, revolving funds, where it will replenish themselves as customers pay back connection costs, for example, for electricity. So there are many ways that you can finance non-immediately sustainable projects by other means. And I think this answers often the question of cities, which say, well, if we want to green our city, it's not going to generate money, but you can generate money otherwise. For example, land pooling or by taxing private developers who are building just commercial buildings in other areas, and capturing part of these profits, etc., and directing them to green projects when they're not sustainable.
Actually, at least we have already, it's perfect. So you answered the question. We have a question from Rosemary asking if you could give a bit of example and if you have some best practicing for financing port-based business or port planning expansion. Maybe we can take the example of Port of San Diego, because I think it might be interesting also to consider it as a good practice as well that we can get inspired from.
Sure. Let's go directly to San Diego. I think, and again, this is one case study. There are many examples that are publicly available, and sure through AIVP. And I've seen, by the way, some good examples of good practices and interviews with ports on AIVP that make a lot of sense. I think San Diego, reason why we chose it is also because they were probably one of the first ports to get engaged. And I want to highlight that, of course, they were one of the first, but they also got, at some point, a lot of support from the US government. There are many good things that were done, initiatives, tax breaks, subsidies, clear guidance from government to help them engage in this strategy. And I think that is, of course, very important. Not always the case, but it is very important when national governments are behind the port cities. So very briefly, it's a good example because they really incorporated all of the typical steps of what let's say a good port decarb strategy should be, and we've broken this down into 5 elements. The first being, you need to develop a strategy and prepare for it. And in the case of San Diego, they tied decarbonization with community co-benefits from the start. So noise, air pollution, clean infrastructure, connecting for the neighboring communities, which usually are poorer communities, etc. So they tied the decarb to community benefits. That's critical. Also, I think they prepared in terms of taking an inventory of pollution, emissions, inefficiencies, and of course, that's one great example where technology can help. There are many different types of technologies today existing, to take inventory, to measure, to track, to monitor. I think this is definitely one that cities should take on very early on. They then implemented decarbonization actions in terms of port development. So planning, new facilities in the port, construction, new construction. Sorry, I forget the word now, but the norms of new constructions, what types of materials to use, but also retrofitting existing construction, allocating land, having a strategy to allocate land to green or decarbonization activities. So that's all the planning and development aspect to it, which they included. And then slightly more on actions on energy demand and energy supply. So as you know, you have always the two aspects. Demand is of course, the uses, and the supply is how you bring the energy to people. So on the demand side, for example, amongst others, right? There are many, but they have a clear goal to transition to 100% zero emission cargo trucks, for example, by 2030, as well as others. And on this aspect, of course, ports alone, cannot be the sole player, actor in this transition. There's a mix of, the port providing the right framework, incentives to operators to shift to clean trucks, subsidies, etc. But also private, players can see the economic benefits with the right conditions. And then finally, supply side. Well, they engage into, supplying decarbonized shore power for ships, and for example, started deploying the infrastructure, which is critical, as well as, working with the users of the port towards this shift. And then one example of how this can be done is that in this case, the utility, in this case SC Edison, provided the electricity, the billing, brought the service to the port users, but the port on their end ensured the framework and funded the infrastructure upgrades.
And Denise, what were the financial mechanisms behind this? They took all these actions, but for what kind of financial products that supported them?
So in the case of San Diego, I think, one is their own funding sources, traditional funding sources, fees that they get, etc. And two, in this case, for planning actions and also cost, they resorted to basically government funding in that case. So it wasn't, to my knowledge at least, right? They used SC Edison as much as possible, but for the financing side and funding side, it was pretty standard.
Perfect. We have also another case to show, but I suggest that we maybe go to a bit more information about the process we are setting up before we take the questions from the audience today. So maybe Marine, you want to say a bit more?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this session. Just for a short reminder, I know a lot of you have already heard it from me before, but as you know, we are working on this process for the months to come. So for now, we're still in this phase where we discuss with AIVP members to really highlight the key topics they want to work on and to find innovation, find solutions that will answer their needs. So we are also mobilizing this ecosystem through these digital sessions right now. We're in active look for solutions that will be the next generation of energy, of biodiversity protection, of everything that can be relevant in the port city and maritime industry ecosystem. So if you have a solution, you can introduce it into our application form, which you will find on the website of Blue Morpho. And whether you are a city, an investor, a port, or a solution provider, we all invite you to join us for this co-construction day in Monaco on June 6th. that will be right before the Blue Economy and Finance Forum, which is held by our partners, the Foundation Prince Albert II and their other partners, which is in the context of UNOC. And of course, we will keep on building on this momentum for the next few months, especially until the AIVP conference in November. Just to share maybe a little bit more about the gathering in Monaco. So we will have a day which is mostly dedicated to discussion. So in the morning, we will still have 2 keynotes and panels where we will have some discussion to kind of kick off the day. And then for the rest of the day, we will have a lot of one-to-one meetings, some exclusive workshops to highlight cases, just like we are doing right now. We will go in more details because we will be working on these concrete cases we are building at the moment. We will also have you welcome in the Monaco Yacht Club, and you will of course be invited to participate in the Blue Economy and Finance Forum. So yeah, a bit more about what we're doing in June.
Thank you very much, Marine. And indeed, the goal is really to have a co-construction day. So right now, we're just getting you a bit of inspiration for what could be the relevant financial model, but we want to be very innovative. And just also to cover a different topic that we are very interested in. Basically, the green financing is very important to us, but also anything related to the beyond fossil fuel, which is also a very important point, as we started discussing that also with Denise before. We are also very interested in ship breaking and refitting, and I think we have a question about the interest right now in the decarbonization of the shipping industry. Is definitely a strong focus. We know a lot of funds working on that, not only banks but also private equity funds that also join the day. But as we mentioned before, you know, the shipping industry cannot do the decarbonization by its own. You need to make sure we have the right energy sources, so that's why we are focusing on that. 2 other aspects very important to us, the biodiversity protection and also how to leverage data to make these financial mechanisms even more attractive when it's deal with sustainable finance. So I think all those topics are quite relevant also for investors. If you disagree, Denise, please let us know. But I think that this is quite of the scope that we have also, and just also for you to know, we have a lot of discussion with different institutions who will join on the 6th of June, and are also looking forward to build a relationship with Port City right now. Denise, if you're okay with this, we might jump into the questions. So I think we have already collected questions before today, so we can jump on them, and we have received additional ones. So maybe we can start with the first one. So yes, we had this question before. What exactly is a bond, and what is the difference between a bond and a loan?
Well, basically, a bond is just an instrument, a debt instrument that you can issue to source a pool of investors that is much wider than just banks. You know, banks will offer loans. Bonds can be issued to different types of investors across the world, and really what it allows you to do is to expand the pool of capital that you can have access to versus a loan. So there are many other differences, but you know, that is the key one. And you know, interestingly, often you know, bonds are public instruments, and they're listed, and so this gives access this gives you as a bond issuer access to a huge pool of capital, which focuses on you know, public securities rather than private ones.
Also very interesting, because we see a growth in sustainable bonds. This is also a growing trend, but we will come back on this topic also later during the next webinar, where we'll especially address sustainable finance. And what we can share with you today is that we're going to have actually investors joining, especially to work on sustainable finance and sustainable bonds. And they're really considering Port City as very interesting ecosystems to work on that. So today is just an introduction, but we will deep dive a bit more. Today is open to all company Port City. It doesn't have to be only AIVP members, but for those specific one, we will especially you know, deep dive with AIVP members or people joining the the initiative. I think, Marine, we have also another question that came, which is what are the, when we focus on sustainability criteria for financial products, what are the associated challenges? So if I want to develop a sustainable finance product, or if I want to apply for a sustainable finance product or impact fund, what are the criteria that I need to fit with?
I mean, it's impossible to answer this question because there are many projects, there are many types of criteria, there are many environments. But what I can say, for example, and it's the second case study that we highlighted, is that there are standards that have emerged, right, in the green bond market, for example, that Cape Town in particular at the time was the first African city, I think even emerging market potentially city, to abide by, to meet, and you know, and giving an example to other cities. And I think in each case you need to understand upstream what the framework is, and then choose the right sustainability criteria. But there's not one set of sustainability criteria, right? Fundamentally, it always comes down to metrics, to impact, etc. But there can be as many approaches and metrics as there are opportunities and almost, you know, investors. So what is interesting is that you do have, again, as mentioned, and sorry, I didn't mention the name of the standard that Cape Town followed. That was the Climate Bond Initiative standard or taxonomy, and I think that one is pretty stringent. But of course, if you meet the requirements, and it's not only the impact that you have, it's also the way you monitor the projects, how you report on you know, performance. That gives you a very high much higher likelihood of your bond being oversubscribed or subscribed by international investors, private, but also public, or you know, such as development finance institutions.
But because that's also the value of sustainable finance, because some investors they have their own KPI, and they have also to invest in green project or blue projects. So that's where you match actually those expectations. And as you mentioned, there is also a kind of taxonomy. We see more and more investors, and also, you know, when you have growing markets, you want also to define what will be those criteria. So we need also to look at standards. They are evolving. And actually, it's also very interesting because in the next webinar, we're going to speak also with LuxFlag, which is a global labeling agency on sustainable finance. We'll also share a bit more about the different criteria, but also the different label given to funds and financial products. So the goal also of LuxFlag is also to match that with the port cities to further support the port city in their green transition. So that could be also quite interesting. I think we have another question.
Just one comment very quick, because I know it can be a bit daunting for cities with everything that's going on, but the cities have very, I don't want to say easy, but there's a lot of technical assistance funding, and in general funding available from, you know, multiple institutions to help cities prepare for a sustainable infrastructure transition, for the issuance of a green bond, for example, or climate bond. So this is all, you know, accessible to cities at no cost, I would say, or minimal costs.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's very interesting support indeed. So we have this question that we can see now on the screen, which is Europe? So when we speak about sustainable finance, is it more European focus or is it more global? I know we have participants from US also with us today. So like, of course, we see a lot of communication on the US, and as you mentioned, it's a bit evolving rapidly, but could sustainable finance and any green project apply in Europe and elsewhere in the world?
It's absolutely global. I mean, I think China is the country today investing the most, or that has invested the most in a transition to green infrastructure. It is counterintuitive, right? China being a huge industrial country, and often pointed to as being a polluter, etc. But they are the ones who have invested the most. African cities, as you can see with Cape Town, but there are many other examples, are very active. Latin American cities, very, very active, and of course US cities and regions. So it is absolutely global, and it's not just about following a hype or the guidelines. It's about actually building the future of the cities, right? It's about the citizens' health. It's about resilience to climate change, which is a reality. It's about often it's also about creating a longer term improvement including in the country's business and activity and economy, right? Even though the costs in the short term are high and sometimes difficult to fund, to finance, and to accept, the long-term benefits are real, and they are also economic.
We have also a question. I don't know if you're familiar with this, actually, Denise, but I will ask a question. We have some projects at city level supported by the European Commission, more for innovation purpose. Do you think that the support of the European Commission could help also gather more financial players? I guess that we should consider different type of support from the European Commission.
I mean, yes, the European Commission, and I'm sure there are many specialists around the table, but the European Commission plays a critical role, in particular for port cities. I know that they have a 400 or 500 million euro or so program supporting the transition of port cities to green infrastructure and e-fuels. I think it's called the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Facility, but that's just one example of funding available from the EU, and absolutely the EU in general, whether it's the Commission or EIF, the European Investment Fund, etc., are very involved and play an important role. I don't know if that was the question, Jardine, but
yes, absolutely. And it's also, I think that EIB is also investing a lot and supporting a lot the green transition. We're going to have also a discussion with the Clean Industrial Deal from the European Commission now, which is also very committed and very dedicated also to port cities. So obviously, it's quite interesting to address and to further collaborate with the European Commission from innovation point of view, but for also infrastructure financing point of view, for sure.
But again, insisting I mean, EU is active across the globe, I guess, but there are other institutions that are very, very present in emerging markets, in particular, like the IBRD, the World Bank entity called IBRD. I mentioned the Global Environment Facility, etc. But the UN, some of the UN entities are extending significant funding to help port cities transition. Local, regional development banks, Asian Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank. I mean, they're all African Development Bank, of course. They're all very, very present and supportive, and more importantly, have funding to support port cities.
Exactly, and that's what the goal of we have for these actions that we are doing right now, because we are indeed engaging with different financial players, both more for public but also private calls. So it could be also interesting to know from our participants, if you would like to receive more information about these actions, financing maritime innovation and infrastructure for climate in ocean, please don't hesitate to let us know, because we will be able to send you more information and also maybe further adapt depending on your profile, whether you're a port city or port city, innovative company or another organization. Obviously, it's quite important to us. I give the time for our participant to answer, but I have also another question for you. I think you already answered, but this is coming back as a question, Denise, is what difference you will do between public financing and private financing for port cities? Because we said blended finance, we said both can be targeted, but do you consider they have different expectations?
Of course, I mean, there are major differences between public funding and private sector funding. The key ones being the ones we outlined earlier, right? When you're dealing with private sector funding, you're always going to have to create an environment that really directly addresses private investor concerns, create the right concession terms when it's a concession, create the right, you'll be challenged on whether the risks aren't too high, whether the returns are sufficient. So indeed, they are very different, but I think the key message is that they work together. And nowadays, more than ever, right? There's a lot of there are many bridges between public funding and private sector funding today, and with the right support, that creates a lot of opportunities for cities.
Very good. And actually, that's also the point, as I started discussing before, that when you deal with sustainable finance and discussing with also additional experts on sustainable finance, we realize that ESG can be a business opportunity for port cities, because we have some financial players that have to fit with ESG compliance. And basically, port city feel old. We can work on the environmental part, the social part, the governance part actually of the port cities. So that might be very interesting also to consider that further. So I think we are already 1 hour together, so I think we're going to have to conclude. So again, we are looking forward to see you all on the 24th of April with Isabelle Delas from LuxFlag, where we're going to also deep dive a bit more about sustainable finance. Thank you so much, Denise, for answering all our questions. I see that we have a bit more questions, but we will answer them, separately in more details. We will have the great pleasure to have you with us also in the 6th of June in Monaco to be part of this co-construction approach, where we can bring also your expertise, not only supporting infrastructure and project, but also innovative company to reach their target in financing and raising money. So that's quite interesting. So thank you very much also, Marine, for organizing it, and looking forward to see you all. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you again, Denise.
Many thanks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.